Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be part of this conference, and I think I'm going to give you a little bit of a different talk that hopefully will kind of get your mind going a little bit. So I know you're all about data-driven approaches to business. I'm going to talk a little bit about business education and a data-driven approach to what I think is the most important priority in our education right now, and that's getting serious about skill development. So I'm going to jump right in. I've just got 20 minutes, so let's jump in. So first of all, I just want to say that a lot of the ideas I'm going to talk about today, you can, if you'd like, find this article online, Driving Academic Quality. This is actually a book, an electronic book. It's freely available online, and my chapter is the first chapter. So a lot of the ideas I'll talk about in the talk today, if you want to revisit them, Driving Academic Quality, find it online, check it out as the first chapter. Okay, so here's where I want to focus. So-called transversal skills, transferable skills, 21st century skills, the skills of success. The simple matter is this: when our students graduate, they graduate into a job market, and we don't know what that job market will look like. It is now evolving so quickly, jobs disappearing that were there for years, brand new jobs that never existed before appearing, and we know that our students often move from job to job to job, sometimes as many as 5 to 7 specific placements before they find their career. So if this is the world we're putting students in, how do we prepare them? Yes, there's the knowledge we give, but there's also the skills, and it's the skills I'm really going to focus on today. So the idea here is, if we teach our students good problem-solving skills, critical thinking, creative thought, if we teach them how to interact well with others, expressive communication, receptive communication, collaboration, and if we teach them to know themselves, metacognition, if they can really look at themselves in a reflective way, find weaknesses and grow, if they have these skills, they can succeed in almost any context. And so if we can take their time with us as a chance to really develop these skills, then we're really doing them a major service. I mean, this is the best way, in my opinion, we can impact student success. But how do we do that? There are challenges to developing skills, and most importantly, this is data-driven, there are challenges to measuring skills. And I want to suggest to you that we now have a way to meet those challenges and to get very serious about developing these skills in our students, and to do so in a very data-informed manner. Okay, I need to start here, first of all. Skills are different than information. We have a tradition of teaching our students information about disciplines. So I like to say things like this: you can learn a lot about, say, guitar playing in a 1-hour lecture. You can learn who the famous guitar players are. You could learn what the different styles of guitar are. You could learn what the parts of a guitar. There's all sorts of information you could learn in a strong, engaging lecture. But if you actually want to learn to play the guitar, no lecture is going to do that for you. The only way you can learn a skill is to engage in that skill. And usually you start at a not very good level. So you begin by not being very good, and that's why people are hesitant about engaging in skills if they're not very strong with them. And we're going to have to get over that hesitance on the part of our students. We're going to have to push them into using these skills, because if they use these skills, and especially if they do so in a repeated and structured way, then that is how skills develop. Think of your favorite sport. Think of your favorite musical instrument. Who is good at that sport, and how did they get good? They got good by practicing, and typically practicing in a very formal, structured way. So one of the things I want to argue with you today is that we need to do this in our institutions. We need to get formal and structured about the skills that we value in our students. And part of that is going to involve measurement. Okay, so how are we going to do this? So I'm just going to jump into my solution, the approach that I've been working on in my research lab, and there's all sorts of data to back this up that I'd be happy to share. But here's the sense of it. In your typical assignment that you've heard of, in a traditional one, students are given some task. Create a composition, so it could be a business case or anything like that. They go ahead, they work away, they submit it to a professor, and the professor eventually grades it and gives it back. okay? I am going to be arguing for a different approach. It's called formative peer assessment. It starts the same. We give our students a task, create this case report or whatever, and they do it. But now that's part 1 of 3 steps. Now they submit this. Part 2 is going to be something called peer assessment. And what that means is we're now going to show them what some of their fellow students submitted, maybe 5 or 6 of their peers' compositions, anonymously presented so they don't see the name, randomly selected from the class so they don't know whose work this is. But now we ask them to do what a professor normally does, to look at each bit of student work, to assess its quality, and we ask them some very structured questions to guide them through that assessment, and to ultimately give the student some feedback about how their work could be improved. Okay, so they are doing what we usually do. They're analyzing work and providing feedback to their peers. And as I'll highlight in a moment, they're going to engage a lot of skills when they do that. While they're doing that to their peers, a similar number of peers is doing that to them. And so in the third phase, it's all about them dealing with the feedback that they receive. I'm just trying to watch a timer here. And so in this third phase, they might receive feedback from 5 peers on their work. Anonymous again, they don't know who this feedback is coming from. And their task is to now analyze that feedback. And again, we're going to structure that. We're going to ask them very specific questions about it. That will engage all of their critical skills, as I'll highlight in a moment. And then ultimately, with that feedback, they're given the chance to make their work better, to revise it. They've had 5 people tell them how their work could be better. So we say, okay, make it better. And they revise it and resubmit it. So it ends the same way. You end up getting a paper that you provide your grade to, but it's a better paper because it's gone through this process, which is sort of the peer review process, right? Except students are acting as reviewers and as editors as they kind of go through. And so now, this is where the students are going to get a lot of repeated structured practice. So I want to begin by unpacking these 2 steps. But as a first step, I want you to realize that from your perspective of an instructor, nothing's changed. You give students a task, and then you eventually grade a final product. This stuff that's happening in the middle is all driven by the students themselves. It is active learning at its best. It is what people actually call assessment as learning. And it's known to produce very deep educational outcomes, both deepening knowledge, but also critically developing skills. And let me talk about that really quickly. If we go through these 3 steps, in that first create step, now you can focus on whatever skill you want. This is where you give students, you or an instructor gives students a task for them to accomplish. And when you think of that task, you of course assume it's going to exercise certain skills. And so we'll call this the target skill, whatever it may be. Now we're kind of leaving it up to students here, right? To engage that skill and to produce a good composition. This is the only time we're going to kind of leave it up to students. As you're going to see, we're going to take students a little more by the hand in the next 2 steps. But let's start there. A bunch of students submit something. Now let's get to where the rubber really hits the road here, the assess phase. So imagine they're seeing 5 or 6 of their peers' work. And let me just give you a simple question. We would actually ask them 5 or 6 questions about their peers' work, but let's just focus on one. What if we said the following? Think of all the ways this work could be better. Find the one thing that if this peer improved, that would lead to the maximum overall improvement in the work. We'll call that the current weakness, okay? Explain to the student what that current weakness is, but then also give them some really clear, actionable idea about how to improve that for final submission, okay? So if a student is doing this, first, each of these compositions, they have to think critically about, well, what is the current weakness? Like, of all the ways this could be better, what's that one thing? And then once they find that one thing, they use creative thought to figure out, how could this be better? And maybe they see a way it could be improved. Now they have to communicate this to the peer. And so now they're exercising what's called expressive communication to express their idea. Also some level of emotional intelligence, right? Because feedback's tricky. And so you have to really use the right tone and such, and they're going to learn these skills too, which are really sort of emotional intelligence skills. They would do that for one question for peer one, right? We might have multiple questions that exercise these skills more. And then whatever exercise they get, they're going to do it for peer two, for peer three, for peer four. They're getting the repetition and the structure that's needed for skills to develop. And not only that, but they're getting it also in the reflect phase. So in the reflect phase, now they're seeing the feedback from their peers, and they have to go through these and read each bit of feedback. And again, we ask them some questions. A question could be as easy as, if you did what this peer suggested, how much better would your work be? From far worse to far better. Okay, well, let me read what the first peer suggested. This is receptive communication, to read. Critical thought. What are they actually saying? Metacognition, thinking about your own work. Would that make my work better? Is that a weakness? And then once you do that, you have to think, okay, maybe that's great. Now I have to figure out how to bring this into my work, which is, again, expressive communication, creative thought, metacognition. And we might actually even ask them to reflect on the changes they made to justify why they changed things the way they did. That's critical thought. That's expressive communication. And again, they do this peer for peer for peer. Okay, so they're getting a lot of repetition, a lot of structure, and you know what? They like this. They like seeing the work of their peers. They understand that this exercise is important to their success, and they want more of it. Okay, very cool in and of itself. A nice process to develop skills, but let's get to the point of the day, which is the data-driven. And I want to get to specific things like, well, let's say critical thinking. There is this organization, the American Association for Colleges and Universities, that has developed rubrics for all of these skills that I highlighted at the beginning: critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, etc. And so what we can do here is, when students are seeing the work of their peers, one of the things we can ask them to do is apply this critical thinking rubric, assuming the task was one where we asked them to think critically, right, in the create phase. So now a student tried to do that. Now we can analyze each student's work by applying the rubric to it. Why is that important? Well, because data from our lab shows that if 5 students apply a critical thinking rubric to my work, although any one of those students probably gives noisy data, when you average those 5 ratings, that average agrees very well with expert-given ratings. And so we can actually measure every student's critical thought. So as they go through this process, all of their peers are going to apply the critical thinking rubric to their work. And this is just an example of what that critical thinking rubric looks like. And so if I have 5 apply it to my work, I'll have an average, and that's my critical thinking average. What this means is we can measure, as students are doing work, we can measure any skill that we have a rubric for. And in the case of the AAC&U, they have 16 rubrics for things like this that all have been validated. And all have been shown to be, reliable rubrics. And so what we have, just to be clear, imagine the student named Jojo. This student is in the assess phase, so they're seeing the work of a bunch of peers and they're applying the rubric to it. Why is this important? This is, I say, ear training here. Normally we tell students to try to be creative. But in this case, we're asking them to look for creativity in the work of others. Focus and see how much creativity is there in that work. That's sort of like musician ear training. Listen to other musicians and learn from what they're doing well or not. So first of all, applying the rubric in this way is a really great educational addition to the task. It deepens the knowledge. They'll get a better understanding of what critical thinking is if they're looking for it in the work of others. But then again, of course, a bunch of peers will also look at their work and apply the rubric to them, And that allows us to get a measurement of that rubric for the student. So why is that important and cool? Well, because of the following. Imagine we have a program, and this is just some program, overall that students are going through. But imagine throughout this program, we have instructors that are using this approach that I just described. Now, some of the instructors are focused on critical thought. So imagine in these courses, instructors are using this task, and what are we getting? We're getting a measure for every student's critical thought as they're in that course throughout the program. Others might be doing creative thought. Others might be doing oral communication. If we have this smattering of data throughout our program, then we can start doing really nice data analytics with it. So let's just say here, let me just give you the example. Let's say this is some class near the end of the program, and we measure everybody's critical thinking. And now we do a sort of path analysis. We say, okay, we know how good all the students are at critical thinking. Now let's look at their history, their academic history, Let's look at their academic history and see if there's anything in their history that predicts who is doing well in critical thinking and who isn't. Maybe we find this weird course that everyone who's doing well in critical thought down here took this course. This course wasn't even using the process, but they were doing something. There was something going on in that course that led to a downstream enhancement of critical thought. And similarly, we could be looking at what's going on in courses that's impacting creative. These all become sort of measurement buoys in our program, and we can then assess how various things are having an impact on those skills as they develop. And that, of course, allows us to now be much more mindful about the instruction we're giving. Let's say this professor was using some sort of debate approach that obviously has enhanced critical thought. Well, maybe we want more of that, right? Maybe we want to highlight this professor's work and have it more represented in our program. Maybe other professors are doing things that are impacting creative thinking, others communication, etc. I think you get the idea here. What we have is a process that can build these skills and at the same time measure them. And through the measurements of the skills, we can now use sort of big data analytic approaches to actually see what is impacting those measurements. And then we can optimize those things that are optimizing our skills education. This is the approach I think we need to take to get serious about the development of skills. And nowhere better than in a business program, where people are putting those skills to the test the moment after they graduate. This was interesting for you. Let me just kind of wrap things up here then. In my opinion, our system is a little out of balance. We put too much emphasis on content, not enough on skill development. And when we do skill development, we do it kind of informally. I think we need to do it more formally, more mindfully. I think this technology-enabled peer assessment approach that I told you about provides an evidence-based way to do this, to both develop these skills and when you combine it with rubrics, to measure these skills. And then once you can measure them, now you have the data analytic abilities to use those measurements and to optimize them. That's the suggestion I want to rattle around in your brains a little bit. This is scalable to any learning context. We've got a lot of data to show this. So if you would like, please send me an email if you'd like to learn about the technology that we've built to do all this. We have a technology called Peer Scholar. You can see vision.peerscholar.com if you'd like, but feel free to reach out if you'd like to know more about that technology. And we are also continually doing research, global research around skill development. So if you think you or your institution might like to be part of that global research, we would love to have you. Whew. All righty. Thank you. Thank you for the time to watch this. I hope you found it interesting. And yes, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Have a great day, y'all. Bye-bye.